The screens flickered, a digital dance of numbers that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the global economy. Green numbers turned red as panic swept the markets, a wave of anxiety that rippled across continents. Gold shattered records, reaching heights unseen in decades, while silver surged alongside it, a twin beacon of hope and fear. The world took notice, eyes glued to screens, ears tuned to the urgent tones of news anchors. This was more than just another market frenzy. It was a crisis of trust, a seismic shift in the financial landscape. This wasn't just another market frenzy, it was a crisis of trust. The very foundations of the financial world seemed to tremble, as if questioning their own solidity. The world was losing faith in the United States, the bedrock of the global financial system. The stars and stripes fluttered in the wind, a symbol of stability now shadowed by doubt. For decades, the dollar was king, reigning supreme in the global marketplace. U.S. bonds were the safest bet, a fortress of financial security. U.S. bonds the safest bet, a cornerstone of investment portfolios worldwide. But now, cracks were appearing in this once unassailable fortress. Now, investors and nations were fleeing to gold and silver, seeking refuge from uncertainty. The gleam of these metals offered a sense of security, a tangible asset in a world of digital doubt. Every ounce of gold bought was a quiet vote of no confidence in American leadership. It was a whisper that echoed through vaults and trading floors alike. The gleam of precious metals reflected the dimming light of the American promise. Once a beacon of hope and opportunity, now a flickering candle in the winds of change. The old story, America leads, the world follows, was unraveling. The narrative of unquestioned leadership was being rewritten, line by line. Nations once content to follow were now charting their own course. The flags of emerging powers fluttered with newfound confidence, signaling a shift in the global order. The surge in gold and silver marked the opening of a new act in world history. It was a chapter defined by uncertainty, where old alliances were questioned and new ones forged. This was about more than finance. It was a fundamental re-evaluation of power. The world map was being redrawn with power centers shifting and strategies evolving. When the world questions the dollar, it questions America's power. The burning dollar was a symbol of a changing era, where old certainties were being consumed by the flames of doubt. The rise of gold and silver was a barometer of change, signaling the end of unchallenged U.S. dominance. The skyline of global financial centers stood silhouetted against a setting sun, a metaphor for the twilight of an era. The unipolar moment was fading. The spotlight that once shone brightly on American leadership was dimming, as the world stage prepared for new actors. The world was entering a more complex, uncertain era. As night fell over bustling cities, the hum of global markets continued, a reminder that the story was far from over. The future was unwritten, and the world watched, waiting to see what would come next. Beneath the surface, America's economic cracks widened, spreading quietly through the foundations of the nation's prosperity. What once seemed unshakable now showed signs of deep strain, as the pillars of growth began to tremble. The national debt soared to unprecedented heights, a burden passed on from one generation to the next, with little thought for the consequences. Each year, the numbers grew more staggering, casting a long shadow over the country's future, and raising questions about how long this could continue. America's power to borrow cheaply was slipping away as global trust in its financial stability eroded. Investors grew wary, and the cost of borrowing began to rise, threatening the nation's ability to fund its ambitions and maintain its standard of living. The labor market's apparent strength was, in reality, a fragile mirage. Stagnant wages, unstable jobs, and millions left behind painted a different picture, one of growing inequality and lost hope for many American families. Economic anxiety fueled division and unrest, making the nation harder to govern and less credible abroad. Political gridlock and public frustration deepened as leaders struggled to find solutions that could restore confidence. The Federal Reserve faced impossible choices: raise interest rates and risk plunging the economy into recession, or keep them low and watch inflation spiral out of control. Every decision carried risks, and there were no easy answers. Old tools and familiar strategies no longer worked in a world transformed by new challenges. Economists and policymakers found themselves searching for answers in a landscape that had changed beyond recognition. America's rivals and allies alike watched closely, seeing the vulnerabilities exposed. The world's confidence in the U.S. as a stable leader was shaken, and questions about its future role grew louder. The myth of American economic invincibility was crumbling, replaced by uncertainty and doubt. Once a symbol of strength, the nation now faced skepticism from every corner of the globe. Once the engine of global growth, the US now looked increasingly like a source of instability. As other nations surged ahead, America's struggles sent shockwaves through the world economy. The cracks in America's economic foundation threatened not just its own future, but the entire American-led order. The world watched, uncertain whether the nation could repair itself, or if the era of American dominance was truly coming to an end. Political theater deepened the sense of unease. Trump's return brought bombastic rhetoric and promises of a lost greatness. His message resonated with many but alarmed allies and adversaries alike. The world watched a superpower at war with itself. America's confidence was replaced by anxiety and decline. Allies questioned US reliability, adversaries saw opportunity. The old optimism was gone, replaced by insecurity and unpredictability. America's internal turmoil weakened its global standing. The world recalculated its interests as the psychological anchor of US leadership came loose. While America faltered, grappling with internal strife and economic challenges, its once unshakable position on the global stage began to waver. Political divisions and economic uncertainties cast long shadows over its influence. In stark contrast, China projected discipline and confidence, with its leaders exuding a sense of purpose and direction. The world watched as China's government officials moved with a clear vision. Military parades showcased new power. These grand displays were not just for show, but a statement of intent, signaling China's readiness to assert its influence. The era of unchallenged US dominance in the Pacific was over. China built new alliances, strengthening ties with neighboring countries and extending its reach across the seas. Expanded the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure project that connected continents, bringing economic opportunities and fostering new partnerships, and offered an alternative vision to the American-led order. Beijing's message was clear: China had arrived, ready to play a pivotal role on the world stage. Chinese leaders saw America's divisions as a strategic opportunity, a chance to step forward as a stable and reliable partner in a world seeking balance. State media contrasted US chaos with Chinese order, painting a picture of stability and progress that appealed to nations weary of turmoil. Appealing to the developing world, China positioned itself as a benefactor, offering aid and investment where others hesitated. China wasn't just challenging US power, it was challenging the model itself, proposing a new way of global governance and cooperation. It was challenging the model itself, questioning the very foundations of Western economic and political systems. The hope that China would liberalize faded. Instead, it embraced a path of controlled governance, prioritizing stability over Western-style freedoms. It was now a confident rival, ready to engage with the world on its own terms, with a vision that was uniquely its own. China sought not to join the old order, but to reshape it, crafting a new narrative of global leadership and influence. The world was no longer a one-star show. The stage was set for a new era of multipolarity, where different voices and visions could coexist. A powerful co-star demanded the spotlight, and China was ready to take its place, not just as a participant, but as a leader in shaping the future. India, the world's largest democracy, refused to be a pawn in great power games. When pressured by the US to contain China, India charted its own course, buying Russian oil, joining diverse military exercises, and prioritizing its own development. This was strategic autonomy, not rebellion. India balanced partnerships with the US, China, and Russia, signaling the end of Cold War logic. Its economic rise gave it confidence to pursue an India-first vision. India's independent path showed the world wasn't dividing into two camps. Other powers were carving out their own space. The era of hegemonic direction was over. India was actively building the new world order. America's oldest allies began to reassess their relationships. Japan, facing a rising China and uncertain US, ramped up its military and demanded more from Washington. Allies wanted real commitments, not just rhetoric. The old patron-client model was evolving into a more transactional partnership. In Europe, leaders pushed for strategic autonomy, seeking less dependence on the US. The transatlantic alliance was changing. Allies wanted a greater say and more tangible support. America's perceived instability forced partners to hedge their bets. Loyalty now required concrete commitments and shared decision-making. The price of friendship was rising. In a competitive world, US leadership had to be earned. The cost was going up. As America struggled, China promoted a vision of multipolarity. Beijing spoke of a world where power was shared, not dominated. This message resonated with the global South, long marginalized by the West. China backed its vision with action, building new institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the BRICS Bank. These offered alternatives to the Western-led financial system. China positioned itself as a champion of sovereignty and development, not democracy. Its narrative appealed to nations wary of US interventionism. Through investment, diplomacy, and military presence, China shifted the global center of gravity eastward. It wasn't seeking sole dominance, but an end to American supremacy. The world was listening. The world's upheavals were not isolated, they were a great unraveling. Economic anxiety over the dollar, political shifts, and psychological decline fed into each other. The rise of gold and silver symbolized eroding trust in US leadership. China, India, and assertive allies pulled away from the old center, seeking autonomy. Power was diffusing, the old hierarchy flattening into a network of competing nodes. America's internal divisions weakened its authority, while others grew more confident. These economic, political, and psychological currents reinforced each other. The cycle of decline and challenge accelerated the end of the old order. The transformation was turbulent and unpredictable. A new era was being born. Historians will see the gold and silver surge as a verdict on a fading empire. Throughout history, hard assets signal collapsing faith in the dominant power. In 2025, the verdict was clear: the American century was over. The US remains powerful, but it's now one among several great powers. India's defiance, China's confidence, and allies' demands prove the new reality. The world has moved beyond unipolarity. The new order will be messier, more competitive, and less predictable. Gold and silver are the overture to this new era. The future will be co-authored by many nations. A global dawn is breaking.